And I knew that if it came down to it, Artie would be right there with me. 10%. And so I'm thinking, if I'm going to be in this situation, I am thankful. Because I knew at that moment right there, between me and Artie, we could handle not just them, but anybody else drug along with them. I knew that I was good shape. And I didn't worry about it. So with that confidence, guess what I didn't do? You'll think, well, with my confidence, I walk up to the woman and go, hey, how are you doing, you little short munchkin? Yeah. No, I evaded it. Because I knew that it put in a situation, but it also knew that the person who goes seeking for trouble is going to find and be rewarded by trouble. So guess what? I had the confidence, but Michael, I chose to evade it. I chose to evade it. So this is the analogy. It means that we have the confidence that we are in God's hands. I like the phrase to measure or calculate. Now we don't want to grasp a stressful situation or how we handle our lives by the measure that we are being calculated by. But in reality, when we're faced with a stressful circumstance, we have to understand that we have to have the wisdom to understand in reality. Because think about this thing. AJ and I was talking about mystery shoppers that walks into grocery stores or restaurants and all that. I had a mystery shopper one time when I worked for Landers. And this guy walked in, his old beat up car, and he said something about, well, you work on cars? I said, dude, look here. I will fix a flat on your bicycle if you'll pay me to do it. So sure enough, United Auto Group is a big chain of car dealerships. And all of a sudden, I get to report back on me. And the thing that got the guy was, he said, I can't believe the guy said this. He said that he would fix the flat on my bicycle if I would pay him. Mystery shopper. So you never know. But if you know a mystery shopper is coming into your store, if you know you're going to do a video or something, and you know it's going to be judged, what are you going to do? You're what? You're going to do your best, aren't you? If you're knowing, but you realize that reality of stress is the fact that during our stress, we're being what? Tested. We're being watched. We're being calculated. So is it possible to have an awareness, or is it possible that the word cool meant something? So I find this funny, because it says that we're in the palm of his hands and we're bound to God, but the last one is lamed, which means wisdom, means understanding, or it means to learn to teach. I love this one, because the thing is that we know the wisdom of what we're going through. We're going to learn through what we're going through. But I love this thing. Jewish tradition teaches that learning wasn't the end, but found its purpose in action. So in other words, to learn how to fish is not the end. But if you remember, lamed is to learn to teach. So then, the accumulation of knowledge was only of value if it spurred one to action. What is the greatest calling? It's not to learn, but it's to learn to do what? Learn to teach. When you are putting others, and if you're considering that all that you're doing at Burger King is make your store look good, well, in reality, that's self-serving. But if you can learn how to empower other people to have that same vision that they look good, now what happens? You're reaching a higher. Why do you think that when the Hebrew guy came up, when the Pharisee was a Pharisee, came up to Yeshua, and he called him by what words? Teacher. It is a person who has learned. I find it really interesting as we go through this thing that 30, wisdom, brings us to the point of lamed. It's the end result. In other words, we start here, the knowledge, but it brings us to 30. And that's funny because 30 is, again, it's this point that now you can do something. Knowing that this stress, knowing that this pressure that you're under is in reality, Lance, training for you, is testing you to see where you stand. Now that you realize, well, if I lose it because I'm stressed out, what in reality are you saying? I measure less. How do you approach stress then? Approach it to understand something is that God is not going to put anything on you that you cannot handle, but when He does, He will provide for you a way out. In other words, a way to deal with it. How to deal with it. So how do you deal with stress or anything like that? Any tragedy? We have to understand that tragedy from a perspective of, oh me, what is happening to me, is of no value. Tragedy that you can turn and then you can become sympathetic or empathetic to someone else who's going to something, and you can offer helpful words, you can offer comfort, you can offer wisdom. Now tragedy has become what? A teaching opportunity. It's become a ministry tool. How can you minister to somebody and tell somebody, oh my gosh, man, I remember when we was going through this area, if you've never had financial stress, then you don't know what it's like. If you've never had kids that are this way, you don't know what it's like. If you have not been old, you don't know nothing. So 30 is this point that you've actually stressed, brings us to the point that we can actually do something. Stress, because again, what does Scripture say? Nothing can happen to you. What does that mean?
Just what it said.
So if you're in God's hands and if you're God's child, do you realize that nothing can happen to you
Outside His presence.
outside of the will of God?
Yeah, if God is for me, who could be against me?
But it goes again, Cheryl, is that when these things are happening in our life and all these things that we want to latch on to, we're not seeing them that God is really in control of these things. And He's trying to take us, AJ, through this circumstance and through these series to teach us a lesson. AJ and I was talking yesterday on the way back, and man, I said, AJ, I consider you an investment because I see where you can be, and I see where I want you to be. And so I was telling AJ, I said, so what we got to do is I've got to get you a tape measure just like this one right here, so you can be doing this stuff, so I can do other things. So I've got to have this vision for where I want to be AJ, where I want AJ to be, even before AJ knows it. But I've got to give him the what? Tools. I don't say, well, AJ, go get this. The thing is, he may not buy it. Because he may not understand what you got to do is you got to get a tape measure, and you got to put this tape measure up, make a mark, put another tape measure, make it arc, and make sure the tape measures are calibrated to each other. Because if my tape measure is 1/10 off from his, I got to know this. So if ours don't measure the same, I've got to make sure that they measure the same. So I've got to equip. God does not call the equipped. He equips the called. He gives you what you need. Some of us need stress in our lives. Even though it should not exist, we need pressure. We need all these troubles because some of us are so stupid, that's the only way we learn. My daddy told me, he said, go ahead, hardhead, do the way you want to do it because that's how you're going to do it anyway. But my daddy also knew the wisdom of that is that once hard-headed people fail in this thing, there's a difference between being hard-headed and being stupid. You know the difference? A hard-headed person will fail and go back, try it again, because I want to learn this thing. A stupid person fails and never tries to understand why they fail. They just keep on doing stupid things over and over and over. The definition of doing insanity is what? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Stress is that again. It's to bring us stress in our life. If God has put us in this situation and allowed this thing to happen around us, allowed things to unfold. Do you ever know that phrase that just happened to use? Though I walk through
the valley of the shadow of death.
But what's the point there? If you're sitting there,
You gotta go through it.
you got to go through it.
Over and under.
Why don't God pick your butt up and carry you over it? Because the thing is that understand the analogy of the valley of the shadow of death. There's a river valley. That is in Israel. It is a shortcut. If not, you have to go all the way around this mountain. And if you're in a hurry, guess what you're going to do? You're going to take a shortcut. I need to get this thing over with. There's a lesson in itself right there. We want to get our lessons over with. Okay, so you want the fast version of learning, you want the slow version. Me? Give me the slow version. I'm good with that. Fast version means you're going to get it over with right now. Dad says, you want 1 lick or you want 10? Give me 10. Because that 1 lick,
You might miss out on something.
yeah, you're probably going to wish because I'm going to give you everything you want. Because you'll find out that first lick, he got all, he going to give you everything. So what happens in this valley of shallow death, they got to take a shortcut. And if you've ever been in like a desert area, they tell you to stay out of wash areas. Because there could be a storm a long way off that you know nothing about. All of a sudden, you're taking this shortcut and you're going. My vision when I was a kid would always talk to me. Have you ever been to the train tunnel? Here, Colin?
Here?
Yeah.
No, I've never been. I heard.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Man, you'll start walking through this thing, and you'll get about me. My first step into the train tunnel when I was old enough to sneak over there. Mama said, "Don't you ever go to the train tunnel." Well, guess where I went to as soon as I could? Bicycle. So I get to the train tunnel. I take one step in it, Lance, and I'm like,
No, there's not.
Yeah, 'cause there ain't no way
what
out.
the?
That's no way.
And the further you get into it, you're like,
Yeah.
you start hearing noises and stuff like
What
that.
is the money?
It's on Old Highway
Yeah,
going towards
Old Highway.
Hunterville. It's right at Sycamore. We got train tunnel, believe it or not. But what you got to do is when you get down there to it, though,
Run to it.
is that when you get about halfway through,
There's not nowhere to.
you're committed.
Yeah.
And all you got to do at that point right there is you're instant like, man, you realize how far you are and how far you got to get out of there. And the problem is you're at that point, it's called the point of no return. You can't go back, you got to go forward. This is the analogy. Because you're in that valley, you're in that stream bed, you're cutting through, you got all your stuff, all your flocks, and at any given time now, here comes the water. But you got to understand what represented the flocks. Either they were yours and your responsibility, this is how your family is going to sustain through the next years. Because your flock was your investments, it's your retirement, it's how you live. You didn't just, these were your future fruits. So everything that meant anything to you was right there with you because you put them in that dangerous position. The next thing is that you work for a man. And you had to give an account to this man for his flocks of what you've done. And you've led his flocks. You can't afford it. They say don't borrow something. Because if you borrow something, that means you can't afford to buy this thing. And if you can't afford to buy this thing and you borrow this thing and you break this thing, if you can't afford to buy it and you broke it and you borrowed it, how are you going to replace it? You thought about that, haven't we?
I just think about the parable with forgot that it was like 3 guys and one of them married something. How it went, but something along those lines. Like,
But there's that point. Is how you going to do it. So now you've got this guy that you're responsible for. And so you've got not only your future, but his. Because you're going to be indebted to him. And you know what they did to people that were servants or that was working for people, and when they lost their crop, the sharecropper or the person who actually owned the flock, the master, Michael still got his money. He would take your children and he would sell your children. He'd take all your possessions because his debt, you were in service to him.
Yep.
So you made yourself. So now you're walking through that valley, and the whole time you're walking through that valley, you know that at any given time now you can be washed away. And what do? You know that God has got you in his hands. That God, I'm going to trust in you. That though I have to walk through this circumstance, I know thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. The comfort means cool. It meant I know that God has me. I have the wisdom to know that I am in this circumstance. God has me. I'm also in the wisdom to know that this circumstance, it is to lead me to this final point right here. Zodiakim Nostradamus. Probably the wrong way to say it. That is a very interesting thing. Because if you add 30 and 6, you end up being 36. What that meant is the righteous ones. The righteous ones. They're the hidden righteous ones.